I am Mike Foley. She stole my introduction of myself. But what I'm going to start with is I'm going to ask the panelists individually to introduce themselves, where they're from, what they do, and what they hope to impart to you today. It's so fun to look out there and see all you with your laptops open like my students. And I'm sure you're playing Angry Birds too. I just have that feeling, you know. So anyway, I will start with me. I am Mike Foley. As my boss, my new boss, I better not cross her. She's a mean one, you know. I did come here from the St. Petersburg Times. I was there for 30 years. I did a variety of things. I'm coming back to my alma mater. I graduated from here in, a long time ago. And I do remember, and the course I teach now is the exact same course was the first one I took here, reporting, news writing and editing. And when I took it, it had no relationship whatsoever to the digital age. In fact, I'm not sure we knew what the digital age might be. We had manual typewriters and carbon paper. And you tell that to the kids and they look at you like, are you crazy? It's amazing you can stand up and you haven't broken your hip yet. So, in any event, I've been here for 12 years and this is the best job I ever had. So, I'm going to start with the panelists. Would you like to start, Jeremy?
Absolutely. So, I'm Jeremy Gilbert. My life somewhat parallels Mike's. Apparently, I'm also a veteran or refugee from the St. Petersburg Times and the Poynter Institute. And I've been at Northwestern, specifically at Medill, since the fall of 2008. And when I came on board, it's a little bit like Mike said. They said, we need someone to teach multimedia journalism, even though we have no idea what exactly that might mean. And what I actually teach and what I study and research is the design of media products. And so specifically, I try to bring a human-centered approach to the creation of digital tools. And a lot of what I do is collaboration. It's cross-collaboration with other schools and other disciplines within the university. And I'm, I think, representing a viewpoint that says, at your university, you have these resources, so there are ways to teach your students that don't necessarily involve teaching them in your core journalism classes. There's some of that goes on, but there's also a lot of collaboration with the computer science department at Medill, and I think that's a really valuable thing, so I'm going to be making the case for that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Williams, and I run placeblogger.com, which is the largest searchable index of local weblogs, kind of like AP, only with way more cat pictures. I'm also a fellow at the MIT Media Lab with the Center for Future Civic Media. And unlike you guys, I've never worked in a newsroom. I've always worked in the technology industry. My parents worked in the technology industry. My entire family works in the technology industry. We haven't moved. You guys have drifted inexorably towards us, right? I think my kids, who are 9 and 11, don't see the New York Times and Google as part of a separate industry. It's part of the same industry, the information industry. So I hope we get to talk about that more today.
I'm Cindy Royal, and I teach at Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. And my background is a little unusual. I've never worked in a traditional newsroom myself, although I've worked for a couple of news organizations. But before I went to get my PhD, I worked for Compaq Computer and NCR Corporation. So I'm sort of coming from a technology industry background, but decided that I was really, really interested in how technology was going to affect the way we communicate. And that's when I joined All You Lovely People for a job that I love very, very much. And so the courses that I teach are web design. I teach some sort of conceptual courses around new media. We have integrated a new core course in our curriculum to make sure that every student in our curriculum gets digital fundamentals, and I teach in our graduate program. And my goal is to really push the envelope in terms of the technology skills that we can give to communication majors, which includes programming and data, for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like that kind of a background will allow them to be most flexible for jobs that may not quite exist yet. And be ready for those in the future. And then I also have this platform for giving women technology skills. We have so many females in our discipline, so if we give them the technology skills in our discipline, that could be a parallel strategy than trying to get them to be into computer science. I think we have a huge opportunity to do that. So that's where I'm coming from.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask some questions, but I also would hope that you have questions. And if you do, don't hesitate. If somebody says something that provokes you or makes you angry or just makes you think and you want to know more about it, don't hesitate to raise your hand and we'll get right to it. I don't think this should be just a monologue by any means. So I will start on. And I
question right here.
Oh. Don't hesitate now. Don't be shy.
We'll be on that shirt for next year.
Don't get me
Good
started
start.
on the shirt. I had to buy them for my entire family, you know. It cost me money. In any event, I'm going to start by asking the panel to say, what in the hell does breeding the unicorn mean?
Who wants to go first?
I did not make up that title, and I'm not sure I know.
Not sure where it came from.
Okay.
I think there's a sense that somehow journalism and technology don't go together, and that those things make a magical creature. I kind of disagree, honestly.
Well, let me start by saying that I think that there is it's coming from two sides. This idea of the unicorn, this idea that a journalist can be a coder, a designer, that you fulfill all these range of skills and also embody someone who knows how to interview, someone who understands editorial judgment. I think on the one side, the industry is responsible because we create these job descriptions that Jesus himself would not qualify for. You cannot do everything, every kind of imaginable skill. And on the other side, we say, we don't have room in our curriculum to teach you any digital skills and teach you the fundamentals of journalism. So we make the idea of a student or a professional who can do both seem mythical. And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that we set out to say that this is an outlandish, impossible goal, and then we say, and I see a few of you around this room, there are some people, but you could never be like those people. And so I think that's part of the problem, is if we knock down this straw man, if we make it seem possible to do all of these things, which I think the panel represents and I think a lot of people in the room represent, then we'll make it seem less mythical. It is quite possible.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's where the term came from, was that it is mythical and this can exist. And you're right, these handful of people are just rare and beautiful. And, but I think there's a lot of us who would like to develop more of those rare and beautiful people. And that's, why we're here. I just think there's a range of skills and a different level of emphasis that different people can have in that range. And it's just a much broader range than we've considered in the past.
And the other thing is, we didn't know, especially when I first heard this term thrown around a couple years ago, what exactly the skills an interactive journalist might need. And there has been this transition,
They
right?
change, yeah.
It used to be that you were a backpack journalist, that you were somehow equal parts reporter, writer, audio editor, video shooter, and now we also wanted to layer on top of that designer, programmer, front-end developer. And I think as we understand each discipline, we allow for specialization. And then this idea that you can't be all things doesn't even matter, because we have people who can do each of those things well.
We're also living through a tremendous era of democratization of computer science and programming. I mean, things like CodeYear, there are about a zillion different free tools online that you can learn to use all kinds of skills. And the great thing about it is, I think, even as little as 5 years ago, the beginner skills that you could get, the things that you could produce with them were really boring. They weren't useful to you, okay? And now, I teach a course on data visualization for absolute beginners who don't do computer science for a living, who don't intend to do data visualization for a living. I was teaching it to people in nonprofits, and by the end of a 4-week class, they were writing data visualizations that hit the New York Times API. We're at a point where you don't necessarily have to get a computer science degree to use computer science skills.
Absolutely. And I think that we're just at a point where people in journalism have to be able to communicate with a broad range of different kinds of people. So even if you're not a programmer, you're probably going to deal with somebody who does programming or works with data, and that can help you. And you have to be able to speak their language. It's not like we'll throw it over the fence to those people, those guys, quite often in the basement, and they'll make it look pretty for us, but that's not what we do. I mean, those days are gone.
Right.
I am old, so this doesn't bother me that much. But if I were younger, I'd be scared to death.
They should be excited.
As a professor, and as students aren't, they love it, they embrace it, they were born with it in their blood. But how, as a professor, do I deal with this? How do I learn this? You talked in your note, you talked about code fear and math fear, and that's it. You got me.
When I was teaching people, we'd actually spend 10 seconds in silence just staring at an enormous data set until we calmed down. Right? I think it's normal to open up these massive data sets or look at a bunch of code and think, oh my God, and you just have to sort of calm down and sit with it. If any of you had the experience of going to a country where you don't speak the language, it takes you a little longer to appreciate things, but if you sit there and stare at it, you'll get something out of it. You don't have to get 100% out of it to get something out of it. right? And so, but once you get used to actually seeing the stuff, you know, the panic level kind of goes down.
And don't you think, or can't you remember a time that you got the AP Style manual and someone said, you need to know this. You need to know every bit of this, that you didn't panic? I mean, it's no different. We're teaching one kind of skill versus another kind of skill. And eventually, over time, just as I should speak for myself, there are times when I need to reference the AP Style manual. I don't actually have it entirely memorized. There are times that I need to look up how to do something that I'm trying to build, and that's okay.
Right.
That's the fear you need to overcome, is this idea that somehow someone has ingested all of this and knows it and you know none of it, to a place where you say, I'm going to know it well enough that I can look up the things I don't know. And that's part of what Lisa speaks to, is that there are incredible resources that didn't exist 2 years ago, and 2 years from now will be even better resources. And so it can be very approachable. And the students you have today could very well be the people who are making those resources tomorrow.
My husband graduated from MIT and he works at Google. If you think he doesn't look things up, you're wrong. Okay, even people who have been in the industry 20 years, I think there's this idea that they know everything. You know what they know how to do is they know how to find stuff. They Google it just like you do. The idea that, like, I get a lot of students who come in and say, well, I don't know how to do anything, so I must be bad at it. And they don't understand the process that people who are actually in the industry have, where they don't start out doing a task knowing everything they need to know to complete it. They kind of like just hack their way through it. So, you know, it's what the term hacking comes from. You're just hacking away at it until it works. You know?
When we can model those behaviors, if the students see us figuring things out on our own, I mean, that's going to help them understand that that's the environment that we're in. That's what learning is. It's not memorization. It's you know, how do you acquire this knowledge? Do I need to take a tutorial? I guess to some extent, we're preaching to the choir in this room. You guys are here because you want to learn new things. So, you know, being a part of things, paying attention, taking advantage of whatever opportunities you can to do development. I think and this is maybe for another conversation, but we have a lot of emphasis on research and going to research conferences, but organizations need to think about faculty development, because these are not skills that are easy for people to acquire in their spare time.
Oh, I disagree, but we can talk about that.
But they can. They're just
Yeah.
not easy when you have to also publish or perish.
That's true.
Yeah.
You know, it is, and carving out time for it, you know, no matter where you are in your career, to me, it's a little bit like going to the gym. Who falls off the wagon going to the gym, right? You go for a few while, and
Already
then
off.
work is so hard, right? And then for 3 weeks, you don't go to the gym. I try to carve out, and I actually do this with my employees. They can propose a project to me, and every Friday afternoon is essentially the time that they can spend on it. I always try to I actually try to carve out a specific amount of time where the thing that I'm doing during that time is learning.
And then I think that organizations need to recognize that faculty development is a valuable activity that you're doing, and you get credit for it, you know?
Right, exactly.
Because the people who are doing it are the ones who do it because it's fun and they like to, but we really need more people to do that and, you know, bring more people into
Right.
that group.
Right.
And where do you find this stuff?
You Google it. The resources that I use quite often, Code Academy is great, and it's easy, and they're open source, it's free. I use lynda.com a lot. That's not free, but it's, you know, fairly inexpensive. If you buy it on a monthly basis, it's like buying a textbook or something.
Right.
A lot of people are like, you know, where's the book for this? I'm like, it's all online. There are millions of things on YouTube. If you have any kind of a problem, if you Google that problem, chances are somebody solved it on some forum somewhere. You just need to have the language to be able to kind of understand how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of start somewhere and then build upon it.
Right.
Well, and part of the beauty of being at a university is that you are not alone. That you
good point.
shouldn't be siloed just in your journalism school or your communication journalism department, if that's how it's set up in the communication school. That part of what makes being at Northwestern really exciting is that we have great researchers who study natural language processing. We have great researchers who study artificial intelligence. We have researchers who explore human-computer interaction. And they may not be working in the journalism school. They certainly aren't down the hall from me. But by reaching out to people who are going to push you in a different direction. So not all the learning is about the syntax of code. And not all the learning means I need to get up and say, I'm an expert in front of my
Right.
students. I can very easily say, here is an expert who together we're going to show you how to go to a different place than you've been.
Right, you know, because the thing you have to learn when you're doing this stuff is you have to learn how to deal with getting stuck. Everybody gets stuck, right? You're trying to, code your way through a problem, you hit the nothing, it blows up. It's so frustrating. You look at it for a million years, you can't figure out what's wrong. That's the point at which you go talk to other people, right? You know, and being in a university means there are other people to talk to. That's great.
Make friends with smart people.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Smarter than you.
Yeah.
But in many ways, that's the essence of journalism.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have to think about different ways to solve a problem. Maybe that one route wasn't working. Is there a different way I can solve this? Because there's always more than one way to do it. Or sometimes just that break from the problem. Go away, go ride a bike, and then it comes to you.
Yes.
When I first,
Yes, back to the mythical unicorn and, you know, how you get your students over that fear of math and fear of coding. How much of your time do you feel like you're spending on evangelizing to bring students into this new world? I think there are those digital natives who come in and they say, I'm really excited about that. I find that to be a very small subset when, as a leader at our school, I feel like this is the most critical element of kind of journalists that we need to be pushing out. Instead, I feel like we still have somewhat from the high school level, English teachers and yearbook teachers who say, oh, you're good at writing, you should go into journalism. So we have this mass of I want to do long form narratives
Yes.
coming in, and we're trying to really get the math club into our camp.
You know, I think we need to tap into other motivations to learn to code. I didn't learn to code because it was cool or because it was fun. I learned to code because a lot of things pissed me off, right? And I think that a computer program can stand in opposition to things that suck just the way a song or a documentary or a protest march can. You know, so I think you have to think about, you know, some of the common motivations, like why do people go to journalism? Often because they have a romantic attachment to the idea that they can change the world. Well, there are lots of ways to do that, and you know, honestly, you can really change a congressman's life by writing a script that will robo-tweet him every time. You know, so you know, there are other motivations besides this is cool, which you're absolutely right, does not speak to everybody, but everybody's mad about something.
I think part of the problem is that we are stuck in some ways in the age of manual typewriters. That we still curricularly think that journalism equates to reporting, which equates to writing. And that is not a linear progression. Writing is one way of storytelling. And I think that's the big problem, is that not only the high school English teachers do it, but we reinforce it because we come in and we say, we're going to teach you how to be a journalist on the collegiate level, and that means you're going to practice interviewing, you're going to learn editorial judgment, and the way you're going to realize that you've created a story is by writing it down. It doesn't mean that code is the only way to tell a story, or that design is the only way to tell a story, but these are all different ways of telling a story. And as long as we have this notion that writing is journalism, and yes, I agree that everyone should be a good writer, but that's not the only form of journalism. And if we say first, you're going to learn the fundamentals of journalism, and then we're going to teach you these other things, then we've already denigrated that. We've already reinforced this mistaken notion that that high school English teacher gave to that student. And so if we can model the behavior from the outset. So part of the problem is when we say publish or perish for most of our faculty, we certainly don't mean publish in any form other than written. And we don't start our fundamental journalism courses with only writing. Then maybe we have a chance to kind of convince the students off the bat, because many of the best, most talented students that I get come to the idea that they want to tell stories in other forms a little bit later because we put all of these obstacles in their way. So let's clear those obstacles off. Let's show them off the bat that there are other ways to tell stories, and let's get them involved early.
I think what Lisa said earlier was that New York Times and Facebook and Google are all part of the same industry. We need to kind of view it that way instead of separate things. We need a broad definition of what media is, and we need to start our students off that way. But I agree with what you're saying in terms of the students that we get. Sometimes I feel like I'm sneaking up on them with the coding and the programming, and for some of them the light bulbs go off and it changes their career path. But it always has to be about the stories you're telling with whatever tool you're using. It's not coding for the sake of coding, but there are interesting ways to tell stories that are going to matter to people that may be different than doing it in the inverted pyramid way that we're used to telling them.
Question.
All right, so could you be specific? How would you restructure the beginning journalism class, a basic skills class that journalism students take to accomplish what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would do is I would really try to define what does journalism mean. And I would teach that first. And to me, that doesn't specifically mean writing. What it means is interviewing. It means reporting, looking through data. It means understanding what editorial judgment really is. And I would, at that point, say, okay, here are the various paths we can go on to tell that story from those core fundamentals. Not jump right in and say, let's write leads. Because writing leads is the execution of one of the mediums, just as it would be if we said, okay, we're going to do a 30-second natural sound package in video. So in the first place, I practiced those other skills before I would distribute any of that information, before I would present it. The second thing I would do is, in many ways, the best case for why you do this are the people that are already doing it. So some of my students who are still in school are already doing this. I would get them in front of the young, impressionable students first. Second, that in many places you can find people in the industry who are already doing this, and I would get them in front of those people first. Because, and no criticism intended to most of my faculty, we have plenty of writer-reporters represented. We don't have a lot of other kinds of skills, and I wouldn't restrict the realm of the intro-level courses to people who come out of the writing reporting path.
Right.
So at Medill, almost none of my colleagues who deal with design, who deal with programming, who deal with video, who deal with audio, reach students when they're freshmen. So I change who some of the intro to journalism faculty are, because we don't do a good enough job about varying that up. Is that alone going to fix the problem? Maybe, maybe not. But I think some exposure, and I'm not saying that we should not teach any writing, but some exposure to these other paths for storytelling at the beginning is really critical.
And in our curriculum, we had a series of electives, and we were realizing that students were graduating without ever having been exposed to some of these digital skills because of maybe the combination of classes that they had taken. So one of the electives was called Social Media at Work, and we converted that into a Fundamentals of Digital and Online Media. And John Zmickley, right there, say hello, John. John also teaches the class in our program. Now it has like 300 people in it, but it's a core class that everyone has to take, because we hope that they'll take it, and then when they go to take their writing classes, or when they go to take a PR or an advertising class, which we also have in our program, they'll already be thinking about digital. It's not a module at the end of the class where today's digital day, that it's already kind of in their thinking to make proposals that include digital concepts. It's not a heavy skills course because, again, it's a lecture, it's a large class. It's more conceptual about the history and the background of the internet and web, which I think is very important for students to understand, because I think they just think it's magic and it sprung out of the ground, and or that we've always had this internet. To understand how the internet works, and to understand sort of the evolution of these platforms. The skills that they get in that class are things like blogging and how to use social media appropriately. So it's not necessarily the coding classes, but then they're getting introduced to the things that could be possible if they take more skill classes later. That, this is why we have a Facebook. This is why these data visualizations are occurring on the New York Times website, is because there are people who have these skills who can tell these kinds of stories. So, I think the first thing is trying to get things, as Jeremy said, into your core at the very early stages. And I would agree about the resources issue. What I've tried to emphasize in our program is, with every hire, we should be hiring people with digital skills. We have not been successful every single time in that, but that's my role in every faculty meeting, is that, does that person have digital? Does that person have digital? And by just repeating that time and time again, and making sure that's on the top of your mind, that you're getting those resources, at least people who have an interest in it and want to add to the curriculum, want to add to their skill set. You can tell that when you interview them. And so you need more of those people on your faculty, or else you're going to keep having the same things.
I think that's really important, because I think we need to conceptualize how technology extends journalism, right? Now, we don't have a whiteboard or a flip chart here, so I'm going to ask you guys to use the whiteboard of your mind, okay? And imagine that there's one axis that describes the number of sources, right? And the other axis describes time, right? When we add to the number of sources, we get up to a point where a reporter can't keep calling before a deadline. But up beyond that, the way in which technology extends that is extends into crowdsourcing, right? Where you can have huge numbers of sources, far more than any individual reporter could call. And then if you extend your stories out of the narrative box down the time axis, you have things like tickers and box scores. You turn stories into signals, right? So those are the ways in which technology extends the things that we can do with journalism.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are scary. Actually, it's really enlightening. I'm really enjoying this. I'm old school. Let's face it, I'm old. And in fact, I thought lynda.com was a porn site, you know. I spent a lecture last week, 30 minutes of a lecture last week, teaching my students how to use a comma. And they were fascinated. They were writing down like crazy because the high school system in Florida is... Be careful, Mike, be careful.
This is being recorded.
Is not, they don't teach them how to use a comma. How about that? How does that fit in, or does it not ever fit in the curriculum? I mean,
You don't think that a comma in code also matters? I mean, so, you know,
Oh my God. Oh my God, yeah, you miss punctuation in code, it's much worse.
You know, no, I mean, I personally do think that being literate, I don't know about your journalism schools, but if you're accredited, then yes. I mean, a liberal arts education is a crucial part of the journalism component. I guess I just wouldn't say that writing is the only part. I think it's an important part. I guess, though, if I were to say, can your students learn about the best parts of grammar from you? Sure. Can they also learn what it really means to be a good reporter and editor? To gather information and to make choices about that information? To me, that's truly the heart of journalism and not necessarily grammar. It doesn't mean that you don't need to get grammar, but in the same way that I don't believe we necessarily should be spending lots of time teaching you syntax, that there are lots of places you can go if you're interested in code and you need to know, where do I put an angle bracket? You know, there are places for that. Well, then maybe we should also require they learn some grammar. And then when they're taking a journalism class, they understand what a journalism fundamental is, and they understand how to employ that grammar that they learned or that syntax that they learned in telling a story.
I think the thing to grasp is that language itself is a technology. A great journalism example of this is a Knight Foundation funded project called the Overview Project. If you haven't seen this, go see it. Because what it does is it takes massive government document dumps and turns them into something useful. Because what it's doing is it's actually extracting the elements from it. It can actually provide you a little map of, it understands that something is an agency name or a personal name and can draw you the connections between those things, right? The things that are embedded in the language itself are a technology that can be used by technology.
I think that most everything you encounter online is written. I mean, even a video usually has a description with it, and the ramifications of poor writing are much higher, much worse online because more people get to see it. So there's more of an incentive to write well, I think, when even on your blog. I mean, if you care, if a student cares, they're going to care about their reputation. They're going to want to use these platforms to promote themselves, and we have to help teach them to do that appropriately, and part of that is writing. So it's not a separate thing. I feel like it's tightly coupled.
Yeah, the idea that they're separate is just untrue.
Yeah.
Just last week I saw a talk by a Harvard student named Diana Kimball called Coding is a Liberal Art. I highly recommend that you guys take a look at it. It's online at the Berkman Center for the Internet and Society, and she talks about the connections between these two things. They are not separate.
Right.
We have made them separate in our mind, but they're not.
And I want to start to push further. I think Lisa brought up a perfect example, which is to say, coding, especially markup, so HTML and CSS, things that allow you to just present information, probably are not far enough. That, to me, doesn't make a unicorn.
That's true.
The Overview project is a natural language processing project. What we're saying is a computer at scale, meaning looking at thousands, if not millions, if not billions of documents, can understand information, then you've imbued a computer program with editorial judgment.
Yes.
And to me, that's a critical part of this process. And that's why I think there's a difference between taking a tutorial that teaches you some code and thinking like a programmer about how to deal with data and information. That the creation of the best apps that we make now, of the best systems and the best digital experiences, are things that don't replicate what an individual can do, but do what millions of individuals could do.
And also teach people to pick out the editorial judgment that is embedded in code. If you think Facebook doesn't choose what to show you, if you think Twitter doesn't shape what you say, that's totally wrong. Teach people to back up and use those essentially journalistic skills so that they can see the editorial judgment at work in that code and understand how it shapes what's being said and what's being heard.
And that's the case with interface. That's the case with all the different aspects of sort of being a unicorn.
Jeremy, I think you said something very important, that the way and embedded in our DNA Mike, this comes up with what you were saying too with the comma. You know, we very much are in a linear, I mean, how many curricula out there? It's the mass comm course and then a writing course, and everything is built on that, and the writing is how to use the comma among other things. I think what we really have to do is figure out a way to man up, so to speak, and say there are other ways to get a journalism degree than maybe necessarily through that traditional path. It's okay to create in every block, moment of silence, please. And use that as a reporting project.
Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
problem I find is a lot of faculty will come to me and say, well, how do you grade that? I don't know how to grade that. I do a lot of sharing of rubrics and things, you know. So, but it's tough because if you're used to grading, you know how to grade writing. You know how to grade that kind of reporting, et cetera. How do you grade a digital project? Yeah, but this is where we can all help each other, I think, and this is where we also need to talk to the accrediting agency, you know, and say, look, this has to be an alternative.
Yeah. Yeah, because so far it's been Band-Aids to curricula. Like, you know,
It's been bolting it up.
Yeah, you're working within different accreditation standards, but you're you know, either adding things to existing courses, you're trying to add a new course here and there, or like in our case, we just had a bunch of electives that wasn't infiltrating the full curriculum. So we had to kind of redo things, but in order to do any more, the accreditation standards need to change.
You know, the other thing that the existing curriculum gives you is that you guys have, as a profession, a shared notion of where to start. Let's start writing a lead, right? We're talking about maybe that should change, but let's say, what are the 3 starting points for the types of coding that journalists should learn? Like we just talked about Overview Project, honestly, that's rocket science. The guy who wrote it has a computer science degree and he needs it to write that, right? So what kind of skills could you get without that, right? And I would say that the 3 things that equate to that write a lead thing: map it, scrape it, grab it. Okay, mapping it is take a data set, show it to me visually, okay, whether it's on a physical geographical map or not. Scrape it. Learn how to write a tiny, simple little script to extract data from a web page and do something useful with it. And the last one, grab it. There are thousands of freely available APIs from Google to the New York Times to Twitter where they allow you to write little programs to fetch data from those and do something that you want to do with them. None of those are rocket science, okay? I teach them to students within weeks, right? But just having those 3 basic skills could get you a huge, long way in terms of extending the power of your journalism with technology.
And just like long and long form are not the same, but there's a progression there that you don't, you know, you start with a brief and then you expand and then eventually you learn how to write something that's rich and descriptive. If you do those 3 things, you could end up doing what Jonathan Stray does with the Overview Project. It is not a linear path, but it is a path forward that once you have scraped information, you understand how to write the rules that help understand information. And that's the heart of natural language processing. And the other thing is, again, going back to the university, you may not have those skills in-house, but I would be shocked if your computer science department doesn't have a core cluster of professors who study artificial intelligence. They almost certainly do, especially at many of the universities I know. And those are people you can go to and say, okay, what can my students take from your classes? Which projects, and how can they learn these skills so they can start to understand? Because it's not enough to understand what the information in a document is, say, using a computer science technique like artificial intelligence or natural language processing. You have to apply the editorial judgment to what information is important. And so all of a sudden, now you've got a situation where your journalism students and their computer science students are actually working together. And that comes back to the grading, which is we love having people grade leads on news briefs because you can do that in isolation. And yes, one person can write something, but many of the best things are written on teams now. And so another thing that we have to find is a way to grade group work, is a way to evaluate who does what, because when our students, not exclusively, but many of them, when they go out in the world, whether they're in a big newsroom that has a specific team or they're an individual proprietor who just happens to reach out and collaborate with other people, they're going to have to know how that work should go. What's the style of communication? How do you make sure everyone is sort of evenly carrying the load? And we have to find ways to grade them to help them understand that.
I mean, at this point, I think it might be good to talk a little bit about the challenges of working with a computer science department, because I think there are amazing projects that a lot of people are doing that combine journalism and computer science, but they don't happen naturally. You have to find the right people in the computer science department who are interested in working with you. They do kind of speak a different language, and their priorities are different in terms of what they think valuable work is.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a story. I was talking with someone in our computer science department, trying to figure out if there were things that we could work on together. They're trying to solve big physics, policy, health, aeronautic problems. And when you start talking about web development to them, this is what one person on our computer science faculty said to me. Well, our average students, our mediocre students who really aren't very good at solving these big problems that we really care about, they get great jobs in web development.
Yeah.
So that's where they're coming from. I mean, we're really talking about kind of different things. So finding the right combination of people who will work with you, the right project, and the right way to execute that project too, so that the journalism students don't feel like they're being relegated to doing this part of the project and the computer science are relegated to this. I mean, I think it takes a lot of work. There's so much value in doing them, but I think that it takes a lot of work to have a valuable experience in that regard.
But let me push back from the other perspective, and I am not a trained computer scientist. In some ways I wish I was, but I'll get over that envy. But in the same way that my computer science colleagues from time to time come to me and say, do you have someone who could make a website and write up about our achievements? That's not journalism. It's equally so that our coming to our computer science department and saying, we want to put up a website, why don't you build that for us, is not computer science. And so, every Venn diagram is always about that intersection in the middle. But what you have to find is someone whose research interests have something to do with understanding information. Because that's what our research interests are also about, understanding information. And so if you can find a project where there's a sweet spot, where you're learning something and they're learning something, that's the real relationship. The relationship is not a service relationship. Make something for us. You need to make something together. If you can't find someone who wants to make something with you, then it's not going to work. And is that going to be the entire department? Absolutely not. But frankly, are they going to want to work with all of your colleagues? No. I mean, so it's not a one-to-one. And the other thing I would say is, it is a bad project if you set up a project that involves collaboration where the students can only exercise their specific talents. If they don't stretch, you have done them a disservice. So if the computer science students can get out of the class without ever doing any storytelling, with just executing code, and the journalism students can get out of it only doing storytelling in a medium that they're comfortable with and never have to touch code, then you've probably done it wrong. And that's on you, that's not on them. What you need to do is find a place where they have to learn from each other.
Right. I think you have to completely get rid of this idea of, oh, I have a great idea, I'll find a techie to do it for me. They don't want to do your idea, okay? And, like, some of the things that pissed me off that caused me to learn to code weren't high-minded things about society. I wanted to eliminate begging and cajoling from my repertoire. Okay, I got really tired of people who knew a little HTML5 acting like a diva around me. And you don't have to go very far into learning skills before they start treating you with respect. And if you've got that sort of split in the project, you're not teaching them how to code. You're teaching them how to beg and cajole people who know how to code. Do you really want to do that?
So, just like we asked how to restructure an intro journalism course, can you give me an idea of a course that you would design in which journalists and computer science students would work together, and what project idea you might tackle with that class?
Okay, so we've done them at Medill since the spring of 2009. And some of them more successfully than others. There are people in the audience who I won't single out who have gone through this experience, sometimes well, sometimes poorly. But what do? We work on a practicum, meaning that the students have to come with skills. We're not necessarily there to teach them skills while they collaborate. We practice agile development, meaning that every week the students have to present where they're at. So they constantly have to be building something, getting feedback, building it, presenting it, getting feedback, and then rebuilding. We do small project teams because a big project team for us has not proven as successful because it's harder to force the students to collaborate. In these small project teams, they have to pair program. We strongly encourage, if not mandate, that the journalism students do a lot of the actual typing of code.
Yes.
Because if we let the computer science students do it, it takes about 3 minutes for the journalism students' eyes to glaze over and they stop paying attention.
Right.
Where if they're actually typing, they control the pace, they ask the questions, and their ideas are heard in the code. We also force the computer science students to engage in some sorts of storytelling, whether it's verbal, whether it's written, so that they're doing some presentation, they're explaining, they're writing up the results. We try to give the students a lot of different projects without asking them what projects they want to do, because the journalism students and the computer science students don't know what they can accomplish in the 10 weeks that we have. So we give them a menu of choices. We let them explore within those prompts. So we give them a sort of headline and a lead on an idea, and then they execute it. They take it where they need it to go. And because we practice agile development, we guarantee some success. But they'll fail a lot of times along the way, but wherever they end up, they have something that works, as opposed to letting them get to the end of the quarter and then pushing a button and seeing if something happens. Because when it doesn't, then that may well end that exploration. So if in the third week you already have something that works, it may not be all the way that you want it to go, then you don't have a fear of failure because you've already succeeded.
Can you give me an example of a project or a story specifically that was generated as a result of this collaboration?
Absolutely. So in fact, in our first course, the first time we ran this in 2009, we had one of our most successful projects. And the challenge was to take data and tell a story out of it, and tell a very classic story, a written story. So if you can imagine a Mad Lib, you remember Mad Lib, it has a sentence and there are missing words. It's a good way to learn some grammar, right? You have to know what an adjective is, what an adverb is, and so on. We started from the opposite place. So the students chose to look at baseball. We looked at baseball box scores and play-by-play. And then we went through AP stories. They went through about 200 AP stories, and they highlighted everything you would know about that game story from the data points that were in it. So you couldn't write a sentence that didn't have a data point. And what they did is they created these reverse Mad Libs. So we said, we know these things. We know editorial judgment about what makes a good game story. How do we find what the important things are? And in 10 weeks, they wrote a tool that actually tells stories. It tells written stories based on data. That turned into a startup company. It's called Narrative Science. It's gotten some fairly prominent play. It was in the Atlantic. It's been in the New York Times and some other places. We don't just tell, well, they don't just tell the students baseball stories. If you look at the Big Ten Network's website during a game, they're telling live stories quarter by quarter based on data, telling political stories. They're telling stories about business, financial stories, those kinds of things. So that's one example. Another great example is we built a system that there's an open API for if you want to use it, called Ham Tracker. So the U.S. Congress eliminates earmarks, but they don't actually eliminate targeted spending, of course. And so where do those appear? So the first thing we did was, where did that track that spending? So it's in reconciliation reports. When Congress, when the Senate and the House get together, that's where they actually allocate money to pet projects. So the journalism students dig this up. We understand, what does the reconciliation report look like? Then we start to say, how did these things come together? Why is it that sometimes a senator from Illinois is allocating money to Oklahoma? So what this tool does is it goes through and it tries to tell the story of why people might support other people's pet projects. And we do this by scraping the data from these publicly available but impossibly complex reconciliation reports. Then we take it and we do some basic visualization. So if you're the senator from Illinois, we map where all the money went to. And then we say, okay, here's an open API that allows you to look at the information and do whatever you want with it. So we've done, when we do these classes, we generally do about 6 projects per quarter. We've done them 2 to 3 times a year since 2009. So now we're getting up in the range of 25 or 30 working projects, a bunch of projects that were neat, but that didn't get continued. Some of the projects are more directly storytelling, but none of the projects are, let's build a website. We don't do the Mickey Rooney, let's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy puts on a show, and everyone leaves happy. We don't do that with multimedia reporting. We do projects that appeal both to the computer science faculty and students and to the journalism students. And we try to have the journalism and computer science faculty working alongside, whether it's in the project classes or after when we take the successful projects into our lab. And we've got some funding now, but we didn't initially, for a lab that featured the journalism students and the computer science students and the journalism faculty and the computer science faculty working alongside. So we're modeling the behavior we want. Do we always agree? Absolutely not. At times, do these people that I've worked with now for 4+ years drive me crazy? Definitely. Are there moments where the class falls off a cliff because we can't agree in public or because we meander into our discipline and not the other? Sure. But do these outcomes help students go to the Washington Post, to ProPublica, to the New York Times, to some really incredible places based on this project work that they do? Definitely.
Aren't you surprised we went this far this morning without invoking Mickey Rooney's name? Could have gone all day. I wouldn't have thought that would come up. Over there.
I think Jeremy touched on this when you talked about very nature of code,
Sure.
and what it is at the most fundamental level that we need to focus on teaching.
I think there are sort of three things. We can't fall in love with the technology platform any more than when Mike learned to use a manual typewriter, that taught him anything. It was a means for executing writing. So getting caught up in syntax, and at any given time with any given platform, people get excited about, oh, well, we have to teach Objective-C if we're going to create iPhone apps, or we have to teach our students Django because that's how journalists tell stories. We have to teach our students to understand how to learn lifelong. We have to teach our students to understand that coding is a very social, ironically social, because we have this image of the programmer with the hood on and the earphones and sitting in the dark. That's not how it works. Now, you may not be working face to face with another programmer, but the best programmers are very active on social media. That the best code repositories like GitHub, the open source home, is about social.
Right.
It's about communicating with other people. It's about building on other people's code. I think when we get caught up in saying a cutting edge program teaches this programming language, we're not cutting edge anymore. A cutting edge program teaches you why you need to learn to do some programming. It teaches you some concepts of programming about variables and loops and arrays and understanding what those things can do for storytelling. And the syntax is best left to those who are experts in syntax and not storytelling.
I think that's absolutely true. And those three skills that I mentioned earlier, map it, scrape it, grab it, you can do those in any language, right? And honestly, once you learn your first language, it's a lot easier to learn your second language. You just move on. And the dirty little secret is that all of those people with the hoods and like doing the coding, nobody builds anything from scratch anymore. So one of the skills you want to give them is the ability to like browse the giant global junkyard of code, right? To go to places like GitHub and say, okay, well, I need something that will scrape this. I honestly don't care what language it's in, right? You know, if I can download that code and change the two things to get it to work, I'm great. I don't have to write something from scratch myself.
I'm actually doing a web workshop tomorrow on Intro to Programming. So if you know nothing about programming, that's for you. If you know anything at all, don't come to it. To cover the real basics of, what is a string? How do you use numbers? What is a variable? What's an if statement? How does a loop work? I find that the best value that you give students when you teach them to code is this agency to do whatever they want to do. I need it to do that. Oh, I can figure that out. I can make it do that. The practical value of being able to understand the very basics of coding is that when you're working on a project in something like Drupal or WordPress, you can look at the code and not be afraid of it. I mean, you might not be a coder, but okay, there's the word if. So I know like some logic is happening here. Or I see this and I can tell that that's a variable. Maybe that's the thing that needs to be changed to 7 instead of 5 so I can have 7 posts on my page. Right. So you start thinking in that way, but you just, it's like, I often say it's like reading a foreign language when you kind of understand it, you can kind of tell what's going on. You can do that with coding as well, as long as you have the basic syntax. So come to my workshop.
So the classes that you're talking about, they're in the projects, like how much of these are they graduate students? Or 3 questions. That's one of my questions, is undergraduate and graduate, because that could address some commas versus coding. When do you teach what? And are you team teaching with computer science faculty? And then also, do you do any courses working with film and TV production faculty?
Absolutely. Okay, so great questions. Let me take them one at a time. One, because it's a practicum, and because I believe strongly in the practicum model, meaning that I think we need to divorce, that our skills classes should result in projects, that's great. But that to get a, we're on the quarter system basically. And so in 10 weeks, you cannot both teach skills and execute a really great project. I mean, sometimes it happens by accident, but it's not a very strong model. We don't take freshmen, and that's it. So we do it on the graduate level. We don't have a doctoral program, but in journalism, we do in computer science. But we do an undergraduate class with undergraduate journalism students and usually mostly undergraduate computer science students, although we get some master's students and occasionally a doctoral student wanders into that one. We do a graduate level course that is set up with slightly more advanced expectations about outcome, but basically the same. We get more master students, occasionally a CS undergraduate who wanders in there, and some doctoral students. Doctoral students are particularly good for this because a really successful project can become a thesis on the CS side. But we teach it on all levels, as long as you have these sort of basic skills. You know editorial judgment, you understand some reporting and interviewing techniques. 2, we've team taught. We've got around the challenge, our university, we've got a little bit of money. I don't mean to suggest we're better off than anyone else, but what we do is by listing the classes in both departments, then we don't have as much of a trouble saying, how can we afford to have 2 people teaching a class instead of 1? Because we technically have 2 classes. We just happen to meet in the same room at the same time and grade together. So that's a strategy.
The one thing I would say is that if you really believe that people need these skills to get a job and only some of the people will go to graduate school, how fair is it to say that undergrads can't do it? I mean, is what we're really saying is that, in order to get one of these jobs, you have to go deeper in student debt? I just wouldn't buy that statement. I think you have to teach it.
Yeah. I think it's easier to go deeper with grad students just because of the way the curriculum is set up, because they come in with already that foundational knowledge, and they're usually in grad school to emphasize an area. So we can give students a web design class, an advanced web design class, a content management systems class, a conceptual class, a special projects class. They graduate with all that at the end of a master's degree. That's pretty impressive. It's hard, and I want to bring some of that into our undergraduate curriculum, but for them to be able to take that many electives to build on top of that and to make advancements in their projects is a little bit difficult to do. But we continue to press what our undergraduates are getting. We continue to change the curriculum, even in that basic web design class. If they're getting one elective that's giving them basic web design skills, let's push it as far as we can and give them the most current things that are happening at that point. So I don't think it has anything to do with what the students are capable of. I think it, again, back to the curriculum issue, we have to really kind of reconsider what it is we need to be teaching them and make that the requirements.
But, and I think this is a really important but, and part of the reason that I would say strongly try to find a way to do this on the undergraduate level is your undergraduates still have time. They haven't made all their academic choices.
Right.
Now, it's not easy, and I can cite very few examples, but my absolute best, my truly unicorn type students, the kinds of students that employers say to me, can't you find more of this person and this person and this person, are people who got into this kind of an experience early enough that they could actually take some computer science classes. That some of them minor, some of them double major, and some of them just cherry pick the classes that they really need. But because they did this when they were sophomores, means that they have 2 more years to really experience. Where my graduate students probably aren't going to be able to afford to take a second master's or go back and take classes as an undergraduate. So if you can find a way that you can be happy with the outcome, that you believe there is genuine learning, that they can get the foundational pieces they need early, then these people can turn around, even if they also major in philosophy, they're also studying political science, they're practically quadruple majoring, they can still study some computer science. And maybe you're not going to turn out 50 of these people a year, but if you turn out 3, they can actually change a lot of the way journalism is practiced.
I think to say that, well, maybe you can shove this in at the end, it's just not fair to the students. Say, well, maybe 3 of you will have the opportunity to do this. That's not fair to the students.
Let's talk for a minute, excuse me, about jobs, because you get the students' attention when you start talking about jobs. They're all living in fear. I mean, after beer, sex, drugs, and football, it's one of their top priorities. So you had an interesting quote in the note you sent. If you don't do interesting stuff, you won't get interesting jobs.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I basically run Lisa's Little Finishing School for journalism graduates. I love students, and I always have student employees. I always hire 2 interns at a time, and I address them by a single name, and they do everything together. I tell them, you're going to hang together, you're going to hang separately, you decide, right? And they do projects for me, right? Every single one of them has gotten a good job. They came out as the regular undergraduate journalism, going to be a barista with a pile of clips, and 6 months later, I can get them a job at the BBC because they have experience doing stuff on the web with a web startup, know how to code, and can scare the interviewer. They scare the interviewer into thinking, I'm young and I know stuff about this digital stuff, and you better hire me while you still can, because it's going to be really hard to afford me 5 years from now. And I give them mother of all employment references. If they call me, I say, if you don't hire this person, you're just stupid.
Yeah,
you better
I
hire
do
them
that
while you
too.
still can, because they're a superstar.
Yeah, because they're rare. I mean, when you get that person, you want to promote them and you want to see them do well. because we don't see them as regularly. And so the challenge is, how do we make more of those people? Because we know the industry needs them, and we know that they'll get jobs.
They weren't special when they came in. They were the average journalism graduate with like a bunch of stuff from the student newspaper. You don't have to have special magical unicorn students to make special magical unicorns.
It does help, but
It helps, but you do not need it. And to say that like it's a specialty thing for a few people, I think is really unfair and makes journalism school into a racket that takes money from them and doesn't give back.
And the other thing is, be strategic. This is an easy problem to solve if you say, do we want our people to be employed? Sure. So let's go to the employers and let's find some of the ideas for our projects in the employer's ideas. Not that they commission something and get free consulting, but that their ideas are representative so you know they'll be interested in the outcome, or be provocative. We didn't pick earmarks just because we thought earmarks would be fun. We picked earmarks because we thought if we did a good project around earmarks, or reconciliation reports, it turned out, people would pay attention to it. So if you pick projects that you think people will care about, not just projects that have a good educational outcome, but are genuinely interesting to the public, just as you would write a story that's genuinely interesting to the public, you'll probably be better off.
I think employers look at what people do in their spare time. They want to see that you're making projects, that you have a passion about this field that you're about to go into, and so maybe that includes a blog, maybe that includes working on a map, learning something new on the side. I tell students, you have to make things. You have to have an online portfolio that demonstrates that you've made these things so you can easily send people to it. And then the other piece of that is just network. I mean, you can use social media to network and that augments it, but get out there, meet people, let them know what you're doing, make it easy for them to figure out what you're doing. And those people will get jobs. And so we just have to get more people to think that way than think, they get to the end of their senior year, okay, I need a job now. They needed to have been doing this stuff all along.
And you actually need to tell kids that they should tell a potential employer about those part-time projects. I was interviewing one young woman who turned out to be one of my best employees. She came in with one of these undergraduate resumes where her last job was in an ice cream shop, right? And literally her hand was on the doorknob to leave. And she says, well, I have this other project. And it turns out that she writes this blog about reality TV that gets 2,000 people a day. That's the one I want. The person who built something from scratch themselves that's useful. But she didn't want to tell me about it because it was about reality television. She didn't think that was serious enough. And I'm like, sit back down. And the first thing I said to her is, see this resume? I crumpled it up and I'm like, you're never using that again. Okay, your first job with me is going to be rewriting your resume and putting the things on it that actually matter. And it's not always clear to a kid if you give them like a template resume what they should put on it. They don't know. They don't know what they should say to a potential employer.
How'd you get so angry so young? Over here. I apologize if I missed your hand. I've had a number of eye surgeries and I can't see it very well at all. But I do drive, so watch out. Yes.
Oh, good. Could you guys talk a little bit about the kind of student we get in journalism majors and journalism programs? And it goes back to, you said before, where somebody said, they're told in high school, hey, you're a good writer, you should study journalism. And combine that with what somebody said about 10 sentences ago about, the idea that you kind of drag them pricking and screaming into learning something about code because they're afraid of it. And, are we recruiting the right people to study journalism as undergrads?
What if journalism school had washout classes? It does. Right? And what if it contained these things? Because I think you do get a tremendous number of kids who have this romantic idea about journalism. They want to work in a newsroom that didn't ever exist. They want to work in the newsroom that's in the front page.
Yeah.
And if you can't scrape that off, they're wasting your time and they're wasting their parents' money.
We might be in a bit of a transition period right now because there are people out there who want to work in media and want to do these cool things. They might not be recognizing that a journalism school is a place to do that. And so those are the kind of people we'd like to attract. So we have to be able to communicate what it is we do in journalism. It's not just making writers. It's and that's why I think it's so important that we teach these skills in journalism, because a lot of people are like, well, we'll just get those people from computer science. But if this is a journalism function, if people are doing data journalism, if people are programming in a media organization, then a journalism school needs to be training those people in that skill set. It's not enough. Collaborations are fine, but it's not enough to say, well, that's what they do in some other department. I think that what I find is that it's a certain personality that goes into computer science that's different than in journalism. And there are people with high technology skills that once you awaken them in them, and a lot of times they're females just because of the makeup of our group, but there are also males who for whatever reason didn't want to go into computer science, but they're really tech savvy. They just didn't know that they were going to get that in our curriculum. It's a huge opportunity.
And I think we need to stop focusing on the barriers, which is to say, for many of you in this room, if Watergate is what excited your passion about journalism, you weren't thinking about memorizing the AP style manual so you could write those stories. Why do we let the code be the thing that we show first? So don't say, here is a program, here's some code, by the way, it has this great outcome. Let's show the outcome first, get students excited about what they could do, and then say, okay, here's the vehicle for getting there. These are the things you need to learn so you can do this project. So I think that would make, not focusing on the barriers is really critical.
Maybe one more thing is making mentoring a more formal and official part of the curriculum. I have to tell you, as a young woman in the technology industry, when I was in my 20s, I could not get arrested when it came to getting a mentor because there weren't very many women in my profession. What I know now, looking back, is that the 40-year-old guys didn't like the optics of a 20-year-old woman hanging around, right? So especially if you're a woman, you need to mentor young women.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I do a lot of it. But I also think that, solving a lot of these problems is about mentorship, and assigning each kid a mentor is really important. And making that official part of the program would be really
Poor
important.
guy way at the top.
Nope.
Oh, we can't see you. Sorry.
You're in the dark.
I kind of wanted to ask about the program I'm at. You could say, in the process of changing, right? So there's a limited amount I'm going to be able to get to them in the curriculum, right? So my question is, how do I get through the beer sex in football, right? How do I get them to be interested in this and excited about it, and I do it outside of class? Like, is there any, just something that you guys have done to sort of build the culture where, no, this is something you should be excited about, that even when we leave class, something you can be excited about.
One of the things that I do and have always done in every class I have is have students do news presentations on technology news at the beginning of class, so that it's their thing that they pick that we talk about at the beginning of class every single class period. I find that it makes them excited about it because now they start understanding what's going on in the tech industry. I even had students after they graduated that were like, can we meet once a week and talk about news? And so I started a Facebook group where we could post things like that and people can continue to talk about it. That one little thing, talking about technology news, you're broadening this idea of media, making them excited about what's going on at Facebook, which companies are merging, what new platforms are being developed, what new mobile trends are coming out. That makes them start thinking ahead about what's new for our industry. And then I think also you can't do everything in the curriculum, so you have to teach students, like we said earlier, how to learn. So you have to get them on that path so that they know that things are going to change, they're going to have to acquire new skills throughout their life. And so modeling those skills and teaching those skills of how you figure out things you don't know is going to be the most important thing that you can teach them, as opposed to any particular software or skill set or programming language.
I'm a huge believer, I'm going to give you a really unsatisfying answer, I think. I'm a huge believer in the power of small groups. And if you have a small group that, one of the great things you guys have in universities is rooms with Wi-Fi, and sometimes even a projector, is that if you have a small group that meets informally, those can be incredibly powerful. I actually teach computer science to little kids. At my house on Sunday morning, I teach neighborhood kids using it's my kids and their friends. No, don't clap. I'm not a sage or anything like that. They're super fun. This is like one of the most fun things I do all week. And we use Scratch, which is this drag and drop programming environment that lets kids make animations and games, which actually can be really useful for grown-ups. Like one of one of the things I say to grown-ups is, go look at computer science courses and stuff for kids because it teaches you the concepts, right? And like they make little games and stuff, and now, honestly, I don't do that much work with them. I come and like we set up, like some of the kids don't have laptops, set up like all of the equipment. Like we're a really nerdy family, so there's like more equipment than we could ever need. And put it all on the table and like feed them some food. And they sit there and go blah, 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 for about an hour, and it's great. And you can do that throughout your entire life. The reason I think this is an unsatisfying answer is that I don't think your employer will pay you for it.
Right.
So one of the 4 tests I have for will I take on a project is don't do anything for free you wouldn't do for free indefinitely. That's a really good test because you have to actually love it, right?
Yeah,
so if you're gonna volunteer for it, make sure that it's something you actually love.
Yeah, I try not to take anything that I don't think is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, if I can,
Whether
if I
you
have a
get paid for it or
choice,
not.
yeah, it's like, is this going to be fun? It is. Okay, I'll do it. But more often than not, if something doesn't seem fun, I'm not going to take it on. So, and you have to have students understand that they should be going toward things that they enjoy and that they're passionate about.
Right.
Should we lightning round a few of these questions?
Yeah.
Because there are getting to be a ton of them.
Yeah.
How much time do we have, Mike?
Well, we have, 8 minutes.
Okay, so we'll
Lightning
super
round.
fast.
Just one quick question, which is a couple of years ago, there was a lot of conversation with these joint programs between computer science or iSchools and journalism schools, and I just wondered if you have any thoughts about that, or where do you think that's going, or is that?
I think it's great, and I think it is still a possibility. I mean, I know a number of programs that are doing it. We're exploring it. In fact, if you know computer scientists who want to come to journalism grad school, we've got scholarships for them, which is great. I think that is closer to the tip of the unicorn, that there are going to be relatively few people who are willing to trade a Google salary and benefits for the NPR News Apps team. But there are some of them, and there are always going to be some of them. I think the wider portion of them have to be probably students who have some exposure but aren't really that focused.
You've had your hand up for a long time.
I can listen to all three of you all day long, but here's the big question from a curriculum perspective. A lot of us who are trying to affect change within our curriculums are proposing lots of different things, and we keep adding and we keep adding and we keep adding. And what I hear from a lot of people is, okay, what are we going to take away? And if I were to propose taking away AP style, Jeremy, I think I could.
It's easy for me to say that here. I'm not saying that at Medill.
Exactly. So practically speaking, I mean, what can we take? Is there
Good question.
You do have to review your curriculum to see if there's some redundancies, because there might be, and you have to integrate. I think that's the most important thing. These are not separate things. If you're writing a blog post, you can practice the AP style skills if you tell them that that's what you want them to have in a blog post. Then they are participating on a platform. Maybe they're doing some of the design of that. If they are telling a story with data, awesome. I mean, that's telling a story. That's journalism. That can be done in a writing class. I think being creative with how you integrate the skills is our challenge and our opportunity at this point.
I don't think that grown-ups should give up their privilege of making the decisions, but I'd be interested in just asking the students, which of these classes is pointless and you hate?
They're happy to tell you.
Yeah, the redundancies, yeah.
They are happy
You already know that. You already know that answer.
Then why not take that out back and, the grown-ups may have to make a decision that, no, this is really useful, but maybe you need to take some of those out back and shoot them. Maybe sometimes they're right.
What happened? No,
We had one up top.
Okay, there you go.
And I want to kind of look at it from another angle. We're talking about breeding the unicorn. Where do I look to hire the unicorn for my faculty? Because I'm on board. I didn't even work at a school. We got rid of accreditation, so we can do this. We're ready. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
unicorn faculty are even more rare.
Oh, like somebody actually sent me like a job application for one of these jobs at, well, I won't say the organization, even though it's one I really respect a lot. And I got about halfway through the application and I got bored and I didn't want to do it anymore. Your application process is totally different than the technology industry and it's too hard. If you're going to make me fill out a lot of stuff and put out a lot of I had to have a statement of teaching effectiveness, what the hell is that, right? If you're not invested enough in me to have a cup of coffee with me, then don't waste 2 hours of my time filling out this stupid thing.
I think maybe our PhD programs are not emphasizing the right things, because if a young PhD student is not interested in digital, I mean, we should have lots of them coming out, but maybe the PhD programs are rewarding different kinds of behaviors.
And start growing them. You know, if you
Yeah.
go and grab a CS doctoral student and you say, why don't we make your projects about media, then maybe that person becomes a faculty member. That's another option.
Yeah, if you find somebody and you admire their work, just send them an email and say, can I talk to you? Right, and you know, even if you think you can't hire them, just say, you know, I want advice. Everybody loves giving advice, makes them feel good.
Yeah, look at us.
Chicken and egg question. In that reconciliation example that you provided, Jeremy, what came first? Was it the story idea? How, if it was, how did that story, what was the news judgment function at the origin of that?
Well, so it so happens that the computer science faculty member that I was working with on that particular class, and I got into a discussion about politics and about the effectiveness of trying to ban discretionary spending, which had nothing to do with the class. We just started talking about it. And then we talked about how earmarks were outlawed and how the spending probably went underground. And we said, you know what, it would be worth trying to track it and seeing if on a scale level, because at the same time the administration had promised a lot of transparency, that we had transparency by volume, meaning that everything was available but nothing was findable. And so all of a sudden we started to feel like, wait a second, maybe there's a nascent idea here. We know there a lot of information is online that had not been online before. We know that they've changed the rules on how they do things, so probably it's going to be harder to find that information. And so we started to say, well, this is, if there is data, and if there is a possibility of a story, maybe that's where we should be working. And then we'll put the students to it. And we have had projects where in the first 3 weeks of the class, we said, you know what, this isn't going to work. And excuse me for using sort of a trite technology term, but we're going to pivot. We're going to go look at something else. And you have to be prepared for that, because sometimes the projects won't work, or the teams, frankly, won't work, and then that's a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I mean, it came from our interest, frankly, as faculty, and also the fact that we felt like we could scale and scope the project in a way that the scale would be worthwhile and the scope was manageable.
I think interesting questions are where you have to start with, though. I mean, you can't start with data and then kind of dive into it, although sometimes interesting questions will come out of that. But it has to be about the question and what's the value of answering this question.
Do we have another
So
question?
is there somebody over there with their hand up? We can't see you real well,
You
so you have
wave,
to really
jump.
there.
There's one up there.
This is a little blasphemous. It's all about, you guys keep talking about AP style. And I'm just wondering about the way people read news these days and how important that is. God knows I teach it. But I get all my news off of Reader. And I'm reading stuff from all over the world. And, you know, 80% of those don't follow AP style. I'm wondering where that's going. And maybe the way we read news drives that out of the curriculum.
We do talk about different writing styles.
Grammar and punctuation, but style per se.
Yeah, we talk about different writing styles. That AP style or inverted pyramid or, you know, traditional writing isn't appropriate for every kind of communication. And I think you have to broaden, it goes back to judgment. I think you have to teach judgment. You have to teach judgment in what's the appropriate communication style for what you're trying to communicate.
And I think some of the projects that we pick are absolutely about understanding, you know, this is the human-centered media product design that we practice, is understanding what the user's needs are and actually trying to create products that fulfill those. And those involve the kinds of storytelling you do, they involve the kind of user experience and interface you create, and they involve understanding how to get that information in the first place. And I think if we don't do more of that, then all we've done are find new ways to tell stories in the same locked-in platforms as our audience ebbs away. And I think we need to be practicing what other industries are doing, which is saying, where are the people who might be our consumers of news, and let's go and make an experience that they want where they are.
A lot of places I hang out have essentially challenge-based programs, right? So the MIT has the 100K business plan competition. Now this isn't a class, but a lot of people in classes assign it. If you guys want people to do projects like this, one of the things you can do is have a challenge and have an event at the end, give people a little award. It doesn't have to cost a lot, and then you assign people to do it. And then they have to make something and stand up in front of somebody and talk intelligently about it.
Excuse me, we have run out of time. You guys will be around for 2 days, right?
Absolutely.
So, and they're willing to talk to you. If you got further questions, you want to have a dialogue. How about a big hand for this terrific panel?